and I heartily welcome you all to the 42nd live webinar on financial services in India, regulatory oversight at Crossroads, and I heartily welcome our eminent speaker, Mr. P.H. Ravi Kumar, Board of Directors, Aditya Birla Capital. On behalf of Gurukul Kangri Vishwavidyalaya Faculty of Management Studies, I welcome you all. Before we begin our webinar, I would like to give a brief account of our eminent speaker. Mr. P.H. Ravi Kumar is an independent director of Aditya Birla Capital. He is a commerce graduate and is also an honorary fellow of the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment in UK. He has over 46 years of professional experience in the banking and financial sector, including 22 years of service at the Bank of India and 12 years at ICICI Bank. He has also worked with NCD Exchange for 5 years and 4 years with Invent Asset Securitization and Reconstruction Private Limited. He has been the chairperson of Bharat Financial Inclusion Limited, formerly known as SKS Microfinance Limited, for the past 5 years and is also the chairperson of WURTS HFC at a home finance company which focuses on affordable housing for the middle and low income groups. So we welcome you with our whole hearts. Before we begin, I would like to invite our Dean, Professor V.K. Singh, to say a few words and enlighten us about the speaker. Sir, please.
Very good morning to Mr. Ravi and my faculty members who are on soft board and learned scholars and faculties from other states of India. So on the 43rd webinar series, I'm very proud and it's my pleasure to be with Mr. Ravi Kumar, who a lot of many people you might have seen on the television. He's a very frequent visitor on the television with his very beautiful ideas. Today he'll be speaking on financial services in India, regulatory oversight at a crossroad. And he hails from a very beautiful position, strengthened position from Aditya Birla Group. And sir, we all are very patiently wants to hear you and very eagerly want to hear you. So I won't want to come between you and the listeners. So now the soft board is yours, sir. Welcome again from Gurukul Kangri University, Haridwar. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Professor V.K. Singh, and my sincere thanks to my colleague and friend, Mr. Anand Kumar from London, who introduced me to you. I think this has been facilitated only because of Mr. Anand Kumar's introduction. I have a brief sort of a write-up which I will share, but mostly I'll talk. At the outset, as an economy, we are on the verge of stabilizing as a 3 million economy. You can see my note. The note, is it visible to all of you? Professor Singh, can you confirm?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
You are able to see the note. So,
yes, sir. Yes.
The economy that we are, it took us almost 55 years to reach $1 trillion. It took another 12 years to become a $2 trillion economy. Then it took 5 years to become a $3 trillion. We are stabilizing at $3 trillion economy. And we would be about $5 trillion economy in the next 5-6 years. I am factoring in the impact of COVID on not only us, but on the global economies. So I am allowing sufficient time for that. The composition of the GDP, if you see, financial services sector composes is about 6% of our total GDP. It's a little over 6%. And in the next 5 years will be a $300 billion financial services industry. Currently, we are about just under 200 billion, 180 billion. I believe many of the elements that are needed for growth of an orderly financial services system have been put in place over the last decade. We have the Aadhaar card, which enables the participants to be identified. We have the PAN card linkages. I come from the city of Bombay and I am aware of the position before the Aadhaar PAN card linkage came. People having multiple PAN cards. There are multiple names and therefore multiple tax files and therefore lower taxation rate. That has all been streamlined now. The third is the introduction of GST. a single tax subsumed many of the smaller taxes. In fact, the industry which benefited most and also suffered most because of GST is the transport industry, because the transport industry, when it moves goods from state to state, had to pass through multiple checkpoints. Payment of octroys, stoppage of the vehicle meant that from deep south, if a truck is coming to Mumbai, it used to take something like 10 to 12 days. It now comes in 3 days. You can imagine what it does to the capacity of the transport industry. If they had a certain number of vehicles and it took 4 times more time, the introduction of GST has now meant the transport industry has virtually 4 times those number of vehicles. It has caused problems of overcapacity in transport industry. You can see the impact on the manufacturers of trucks, both Tata Motors as well as Ashok Leyland, on what's happening because of the excess capacity. The fourth I see is, of course, the payment system. I believe we need to be rightly proud of having one of the world's best payment system. You take any corner of India, transfer of funds, as long as both of them have a bank account, is almost instantaneous. And this I have seen particularly in the post office near my house on Sundays mornings, particularly because the main post offices function on Sundays. Almost 65% of the queues were for remitting money to their native villages, the money orders. Now, that has moved to the payment systems, and I have no doubt that increasingly the payment systems would be used to facilitate other reasons for moving money. The net impact I see putting in place these linkages, I call them the pillars of building a robust financial system, is that more money moves into the organized sector. Will it remove black money? I don't think black money will disappear as long as those tendencies exist in the human being. But it would be difficult to work with cash economy. Therefore, I would say that cash economy will not disappear, but its importance and share in the total economy will definitely reduce. Given the size that we have reached and the regulatory services setup that we have for financial services, are we adequately equipped to handle the new emerging larger economy? At $6 trillion, we would be definitely the third largest economy, whether by nominal GDP terms or by purchasing power parity methodology. We have, of course, the Reserve Bank of India as the preeminent regulator in the financial services system. It deals with all the universal banks, small finance banks, cooperative banks, NBFCs, housing finance companies. Housing finance companies has moved to Reserve Bank of India only in last September. Otherwise, it used to be handled by National Housing Bank, a subsidiary, 100% subsidiary of Reserve Bank of India. Later, housing finance company has been taken over by the Minister of Finance directly. The entire equity from Reserve Bank of India was acquired by the Ministry of Finance. Housing finance company now operates as an arm of the Ministry of Finance and largely does regulatory and audit functions. Otherwise, the entire policy and regulation is now for housing finance sector with the Reserve Bank of India. You have the new intermediaries who have been approved by Reserve Bank of India. The first is peer-to-peer lending. I am not going to go into greater details about these entities as to what they do and how successful they have been so far, excepting that these are platforms. They facilitate lenders lending directly to borrowers under a framework which Reserve Bank of India has put. So the investor or the lender defines what sort of a risk he is willing to run and what is the yield available to him. The platform enables the linkage of such an investor with a choice of borrowers, and the lender chooses which borrower he wants to lend to given the information provided to him. The platform also helps the investor in recovering the money, recovering the installments, and ensuring that in the process it has a spread to itself. The second category which has been recently started is a replica, and I would say the other side of coin for credit bureaus, and that is the credit aggregators. Credit aggregators, typically when a lender goes, when a borrower goes and seeks a loan from a lender, today a lender gets the credit report from the credit bureaus. The account aggregators are allowed to access from banks details, and account aggregators span four regulators. They span Reserve Bank of India, they span SEBI, they span IRDA, and they span PFRDA. The account aggregators are regulated by Reserve Bank, and they can access details of deposits, details of insurance policies, details of pension holdings, details of stocks and debt instruments held by the potential borrower. So the judgment and the decision making of the lender becomes more robust, because then the lender has information of the past track record from the credit bureaus, and he also knows the current financial wherewithal of the potential borrowers. The account aggregators are just about beginning their journey in India. India is among the first countries to put in place this vertical. They are called as a NBFC AA account aggregator. Currency markets is with the Reserve Bank of India jointly with SEBI. SEBI oversees the entire currency market operations, but insofar as policy formulation is concerned, SEBI alone cannot decide. Reserve Bank of India is a joint decision maker. SEBI, you know, the areas it covers all markets. And curiously, this is a structural change. If all markets are overseen by SEBI, trading in government bonds is not overseen by SEBI, but is seen by Reserve Bank of India. Should we move to SEBI? There's a question we will discuss towards the end of this interface. Similarly, private equities are definitely with SEBI, but the other product where there was a lot of dispute 4 years back between SEBI and IRDA are the units. What do you call that? The ULIPs. The then decision went in favor of IRDA, but I believe the outcome has benefited SEBI, because the investor now knows that when he buys a ULIP policy from insurance company, not all premium is put into protect his life value, but goes into buying a part of that amount goes into buying a ULIP, which is an investment product. Pension funds actually need greater attention, because many of us may not know the size of pension funds. Pension funds are larger than insurance companies. Pension funds are almost of the same size as mutual funds in India. They handle something like 21 trillion rupees in Indian terms. We have two major players. PFRDA regulates all the NPS systems, the new pension system, and we have the older version of it, which is the EPFO, the Employee Provident Fund Organizations, which is a part of pension funds, but it is somewhat like IRDA and LIC. Insurance Regulatory Development Authority is the overall regulator for life and general and health insurance. LIC has been a traditional player, older than the regulator itself, and quite often the IRDA has to find ways of accommodating LIC, because LIC wants to do things differently from the other participant in the sector. The same happens into a greater degree in the pension fund area, where EPFO is 4 times larger than NPS. So therefore, EPFO says that I am myself a regulator, why do I need to be regulated? So these are issues which will need to be addressed as we move forward. Now, when we have multiple regulators, there are, and recently, I will not name entities in this interface. There is an investigation which is happening. One entity which was an NBFC, one entity which was a NBFC and a HFC, one entity which was a mutual fund, and one entity which was a commercial bank. They were working in tandem. All the four are in difficulties today because the persons to whom they lent money did not keep their obligations, as a result of which all the four have come into difficulty. So if the bank lent money and the money is becoming due, the mutual fund would fund the borrower and the bank would be repaid. When the mutual fund is required to receive its money, the NBFC would invest money in the mutual fund, and the mutual fund would NBFC would lend money to the borrower of the mutual fund, and the mutual fund would get back its money. This inter-regulatory arbitrage, or I would not know what collusion, I would use the word collusion, is something which needs to be strongly curbed, and this can be done only through technology. We come towards the end of this interface on the capacity building in the regulatory bodies. We can discuss it at that time. But we have at the top the FSDC, Financial Services Development Council, which is headed by the Finance Minister of India. All the regulatory body heads are the members of this council. In addition, you have Finance Secretary, Banking Secretary, Economic Affairs Secretary. They are also members of this body, and they build the framework of apex prudential supervision and growth of financial services industry in India. If you see the growth in the last 30 years, I'm taking the reforms which began in 1990 as the starting point. The banks have steadily grown. Despite the last 2.5 years, their growth have been somewhat muted. They have overall grown at a CAGR of 17%. Today are the largest entity, largest sector in the financial services in India, with funds of the size of rupees 140 trillion. Now, I must also say that in India, banks continue to be the first entity to whom a saver approaches. This has been so, I think ever since our independence, but this has begun changing in the urban areas and metropolitan areas where mutual funds have started coming in strongly. Banks are no longer the preeminent receivers of savings from the population. Though they continue to be large, they are, as I said, their total liabilities are 140 trillion, while mutual funds have reached somewhat around 25 trillion, which is about just under 20% of the size of banks. Some questions have already started arising that if macroeconomic policies are largely implemented through banks, you have the SLR requirements which are there for banks. You have the priority sector obligations are there for the banks. If mutual funds become, let us say, half the size of banks at some point of time, should they also be subject to such requirements that banks are put to? The second is, you would be also aware that today banks have a adverse taxation treatment insofar as the interest that they pay vis-a-vis debt mutual fund structures. If a debt mutual fund investment is held for 3 years, the taxation at marginal levels is almost half. Therefore, the popularity of mutual funds, particularly from high net worth individuals as well as the ultra high net worth individuals, as well as corporates. Stock markets have grown steadily. The growth has seen, and this is something which has still not happened in India, between banks as well as between mutual funds. There is an emergence of 6 to 7 of the 44 mutual funds which have become very large. If you take the top 3 mutual funds today are HDFC, ICICI and SBI mutual funds. Each of them handles over 3 lakh crores. And if you take the 44th mutual fund, it may be handling somewhere in the range of 10% of the turnover, or maybe 15% of it. Not even 10, because there are 44, it can't be 10%, it has to be even less than 10%. I mean, maybe 1 to 2%. Obviously, when such a situation arises, it should lead to mergers and acquisitions. For some reason, it has not happened. Mutual funds and insurance industry are both seen ripe for merger between the existing participants. So the issues that come in the wake of mergers is something also which the regulators would need to address as we go forward. In banks, since almost 65% of banking is with public sector banks, and you are aware that Government of India is on its own driving a merger between some of the public sector banks, the issues have been somewhat handled by Government of India directly rather than through the regulatory bodies. Stock markets have done well, but the recent happenings have shown that the growth of mutual funds has brought stability to stock markets somewhat, because the exit of FIIs, foreign institutional investors, has been largely absorbed by domestic institutional investors. The domestic institutional investors are mutual funds and insurance companies, and LIC in particular. But since the institution promoted insurance companies like ICICI Prudential Life or HDFC Life, HDFC Ergo General Insurance, ICICI Lombard General Insurance, they are all put together also of meaningful critical mass, which makes a difference to the stock market fluctuations. Currency is one which in my view, is which is exchange traded currencies, is poised to have multiple fold growth over the next 4 or 5 years. They do today 8 billion already. These were set up only 4 or 5 years back, and the forward contracts offered by banks, which is the OTC market, is about 4 times that size. But the exchange traded currency contracts are catching up quickly with the derivatives market handled by the banks, which is an OTC product. Insurance today has come of age with a 5 trillion annual premium collection. Here also there are 24 life and 33 general insurance and health insurance companies. Health insurance companies are a new phenomenon. In fact, there are 3 or 4 companies which are not general insurance companies, not life insurance companies, but purely health insurance companies. And the last, of course, is what I mentioned earlier about pension funds, with a total of almost 20 billion, which is almost the size of the mutual funds. They are very important players. We have grown, as I said earlier, from 1 trillion. It took us almost 55 years. The second trillion took us 12 years, and the third trillion 1 year. The growth has not been without problems. If you see in the last 7-8 years, the non-performing loans of banks have put a severe pressure on government finances. Government has been hard put to pump in the required cleansing capital infusion. Also the manner of approach to handling problems at PSU banks has led to a complete risk aversion at banks, where decision making has slowed down. And if you see, for example, in the recent COVID-19 situation, the 20% incremental lending to MSMEs, fully guaranteed by Government of India, the banks are very reluctant to lend, because a deep feeling has set into the public sector banks that if tomorrow there is a problem, notwithstanding that there is a guarantee from government and it is under a scheme of government, individuals would be penalized. There is a dire need to handle this risk aversion in the banks, because banks are fundamentally commercial organizations, and their working well has very much to do with the growth and quality of growth in the economy. There have been also in the last 5 years the issues of governance in large private sector banks. The large private sector banks have not been without their share of problems. They have been uh, delivering financially good results, but the issues have been on governance. We have also seen the collapse of two large cooperatives in the cooperative banks in the recent times, and Yes Bank, a very large commercial bank. Yes Bank brings to fold the issue of regulatory oversight and the capacity. Uh, at least I think all people from financial services knew that from beginning that there is a problem in the bank. And it has taken almost a decade for the problem to come forth and cause whatever trouble it caused because it had attained a critical mass. Had this been addressed when the bank was still small, the issues could have been very easily handled. This therefore puts a question mark on the ability of the regulator in diagnosing the problem and working out remedies. We have also seen, for example, housing finance company like DHFL and others collapsing. Mutual fund has now begun having its own problems, and mutual funds, the problems are unique because unlike banks, which warehouse risk, mutual funds are a pass-through entity. The risks are not warehoused by the mutual fund, but they are passed through to the investor. The mutual fund discloses all information to the investor, and the investor has a right to exit. Having said that, is there an issue of moral hazard if the investors are not very knowledgeable? And that is the question which has come when Franklin Templeton has stopped payment in 6 of the mutual funds. Uh, there is a strong body within the mutual funds which feels that if the problems in Franklin Templeton had actually happened to either SBI mutual fund or ICICI mutual fund or HDFC mutual fund, the sponsors would have been forced to provide liquidity to their entity so that the schemes need not have been closed. uh, there is also a question of risk management and the oversight by the board of directors of Franklin Templeton in this case. And if this has happened when the size of economy is just stabilizing at 3 trillion, you can imagine the magnitude of problem it will bring in its wake if such an event were to happen when the economy is 5 trillion or 6 trillion. We saw in the commodity markets the national spot exchange issue about 7-8 years back, where spot exchange on the back of a spot exchange guaranteed returns were being offered. Uh, this issue probably is now coming to an end. Two reasons. One is the regulators have been subsumed into SEBI. The regulator Forward Markets Commission no longer alone exists. They are now a part of Securities and Exchanges Board of India. And we saw in the stock markets the co-location case. So you see the growth has come with problems. Is there a way we can achieve the next phase of growth with far lesser problems? And one thing very clear has been that regulators have been in the, at least I have been working with the regulators for now almost for 40 years, and I have always seen the regulators have been always behind business. Can they be in lockstep with the business, which means the capacity and the sort of talent that a regulatory body attracts, the approach has to fundamentally change. India cannot afford any of these sort of issues which took place in the last decade, and it creates severe problems for us because new problems when we become larger economy will have a very large impact on the economy itself. We move to now, do we need regulators and how many regulators we need? You must understand that banking definitely is regulated world over because it is one business where you deal with others' money. And your own money earlier used to be only 2%, 3%, and others' money used to be 97, 98%. Thanks to Basel Committee and implementation of their policies by all economies in the world, today capital adequacy requirements are in the region of US surprisingly has not accepted many of the policy prescriptions of Basel, and their capital adequacy is sub 8 even today. The large banks in US today still work with over 90% of public money, their own money. Their skin in the game is still very small. In India, it is 12%, and therefore we are very compliant. In fact, in many areas, India is slightly ahead of the Basel prescriptions, given the fact that we are an emerging economy and also the pace of growth we have. RBI has chosen to be cautious and has prescribed slightly, in some areas, slightly higher capital adequacy requirements than are globally warranted. So one is banks. The second is stock markets, again globally regulated. I would give you a parable here, which will drive home the reason for regulation. This happened during Akbar's time, when Akbar felt that his population, everybody was honest. Birbal disagreed. So Akbar said, "You prove to me that my people are not honest." So Birbal had a big tank constructed, and one day he took Akbar's permission, and everybody in the city, in the walled city, was asked to pour 1 liter equivalent of milk into the tank. Next morning, only thing is, when the person pours into the tank, he can't see what is there already in the tank. Birbal, the constructor of the tank, he ensured that the person pouring milk into the tank can't see how much milk is already there. Next day, when they opened the tank was full of water. Because everybody thought the other person is pouring milk. So if I pour a glass of water or a liter of water, there would be no way of making it up. It is human psychology that we don't want to pay taxes for the effort we have put in, and regulations which we feel are constricting us, we do not want to abide by them. Regulation also has a cost to business. Therefore, the number of regulatory bodies to be created has to be done after a great deal of thought. I am somewhat today mystified that they have announced for e-commerce there is going to be a regulatory body. Actually, in India, what has happened is that for all retiring IAS officers, these are places for parking. Either just before retirement or after retirement, they find a vocation where they are gainfully kept busy. Largely, this has been the approach. Unfortunately, the pace of growth in the economy would warrant a complete change of approach as to how regulatory bodies are to be staffed. I would say that some of the regulators can take a leaf out of RBI. If you see for the banking oversight, they have a banker who has been the head of a bank. Likewise, I would suggest that most regulatory bodies must have talent which understands the sector well. General knowledge, maybe you can have one person, but you need 2 or 3 people who understand the sector very well, because after all, to catch a thief, you set a thief. It is therefore the staffing of talent is going to be very, very important insofar as the regulatory bodies are concerned going forward. I also see that there is, in my view, there is no need for PFRB, the Pension Fund Regulatory Body, because their requirements are extremely similar to insurance regulatory authority. Insurance is a long-term play, pension fund is a long-term play. Actually, both, if they come together, it would be far more effective the regulator then would be of a similar size of SEBI and Reserve Bank of India. So my recommendation would be that we do not have, like FMC merged with SEBI, it is important that we see the need for existence of PFRVA, and there has been also a debate asking whether, like you have election commission, like you have CAG, like you have human rights commission or the minorities commission, can this body be independent of the ministry? My personal view is I don't think it should be independent, because after all these are working within the construct of the framework of the economic policies of the government. Whichever government is in power, it operates within the construct of the framework of those policies, and it is important that they work in tandem with the government which is currently running the government, the party which is currently running with the government. I would say they should have freedom, the autonomy in functioning, but I do not support a constitutional status to the regulators. What would be the elements needed for a new regulatory approach as we move forward? I see the fundamental requirement is the stability of the system. The growth comes with the stability of the system. Stability is not only in the participants and their operational structure, but also in the manner in which the regulator works. The regulatory responses should be somewhat, everybody knows that if such an event happens, this should be the action. That cause and effect must be well known to everybody, and it should be consistent. The second is the taxation and rules of the game. These cannot keep on changing based on events. When you frame the rules of the game, these need to take into account possible future events, and these changes will need to be articulated, because we have not only domestic but international players coming in larger numbers to participate in our financial services activities. The second is, which came through the earlier part of the discussions, the first is the capacity for oversight. This involves quality of staff, knowledge of staff, talent, technology, and being abreast of business. You need to know, and there is a huge work to be done in this area. One I have not mentioned here, but most regulators have forgotten doing that, is the developmental aspect of their job. They are a regulatory body, but equally the other side of the coin for regulation is the developmental activity and developmental orientation. That portion has not been, I would say, most regulators, maybe the only one which performs somewhat is Reserve Bank of India. I am not seeing other regulatory bodies being very strong in the performance of their developmental duties. And the consistency of their actions in response to events is another critical, I would say, factor for orderly growth of the regulatory structure in the country. But nevertheless, having said this, we come to some structural issues which are not in place today. For example, Reserve Bank of India today does not have an appellate authority. SEBI has an appellate authority. And Reserve Bank has consistently refused to have an appellate authority. The second is in regard to principle-based versus rule-based approach. Most of the Indian participants, most of the staff working in a regulatory body in India are comfortable with a rule-based approach. They are not comfortable with principle-based approach. In a principle-based approach, the approach is left to the governed entity. The governed entity's board must have the maturity to understand what is expected of it. I believe that we would need to principle-based approach as the economy grows larger, but probably the overall ethos within which we are functioning, we are still not there. We may have to continue the rule-based approach for the present. UK, for example, has already moved from overseeing an enterprise to overseeing an activity. they have no the regulator is for ensuring the conduct of the participant, and it does not matter who the participant, whether it is insofar as that business is concerned, the oversight is not on the working, it is on the activity. It is activity based. Issues of conflicts of interest, Reserve Bank has this. The Reserve Bank position is not very clear because they have gone. There has been to and fro in this area. For example, they have directors on the boards of the banks. Now, all these banks which have large NPLs, since RBI's director was on the board of the bank, is RBI responsible for those bad loans? It is a good practice world across that a regulator does not have its own nominee on the board of the regulated entity. Government of India is the owner. It can have, but if you take there also, in case of small finance banks, the investors cannot have nominees on the board of the bank, but Government of India is allowed to have nominees on PSU bank boards. There is no consistency of the application of it. This has to change. You know, it comes back to principle-based versus rule-based approaches. Once you adopt a principle, then it does not matter how large or small an entity is. The other major issue is the interference from the courts, and I would say this is something we have to live with in the near future. The last, I would say, very important is regulators must put as much data of the operations of their sector in the public domain, so that the sector is free to analyze and come out with its own conclusions. I know Professor V.K. Singh, I know I have overstepped my time limit by 5-6 minutes. I'll stop here and I'll take questions if there are any.
Indeed, sir, this has been quite an insightful session. The chat box is filled with accolades. We have 2 questions from the participants. If you permit, I would ask.
Please, please.
So one other question is from Dr. Gaurav Goyal. He says,
Yes.
Many financial services have been affected at that time. So what steps have been taken by the government of India for the same?
When you say many financial, Dr. Goyal, the question is not fully clear to me. You mean in banking, in stock markets, in which segment? But let me take it as across, spanning all the segments of the financial services. I would say that insofar as the government entities are concerned, government is constrained because of its fiscal position, but to the extent possible, they have been strengthening the capital, which is one of the prime drivers for participating entities in the financial services sector. The other is, I would say, where a lot of effort is needed is provide autonomy of function. And I would say this is an area which quite often in my working over the last 4.5 decades, I would say that autonomy is generally not given but taken. And the entities also have to earn autonomy. I have not seen in most public sector enterprises, particularly in financial services, that many of them, they have earned the autonomy. So on the financial side, the government is in the process of fulfilling its role, but on the autonomy of functioning and delivering the results, because the participating public sector enterprise also must deliver its results, which it is committed to deliver. I don't know whether I have answered your question fully, Dr. Goyal, but that would be my response.
Apurva. Dr. Dangwal, can you unmute Apurva? I think she's unmuted. Please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. Sir.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so there is a question from Ms. Meghna Dangi. She says, what is your opinion on detection of material misstatements made by banks and NBFCs Unfortunately, the Big Four are auditors of the biggest of banks, yet it is there where the biggest of material misstatements happen. What can be done to bring that under regulation?
Actually, I will give an example to reply this question. ILFS is a classic example. ILFS had a borrowing of 90,000 crores and it had cash flows equivalent to service that not more than 30,000 crores. So actually, it was a bankrupt organization for at least 5-6 years before it went under. Uh, the regulators had all the data. It is a clear case of regulatory failure. The auditors failed, the board of the organization failed, so there is a failure all around. And I can only say that India cannot afford another ILFS. India definitely cannot another ILFS. Uh, it also, one another segment I forgot is the credit rating agencies. You know, people put money in ILFS debt because it had a AAA rating. What is the responsibility of credit rating agencies? In fact, I can share in this one that I am part of a pension fund and which has an exposure to ILFS, and we wanted to sue the credit rating agencies. The market, the at the highest level in the country, that is being examined whether we can be permitted to sue the credit rating for not doing their job diligently. It is, your question is not easy to answer. They are all responsible, and so far none of them has been penalized. That is the irony of it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from Dr. Anand Kumar. He says, your views on regulations are becoming more mature from the point of view of customers' protection. Secondly, deposit insurance is measured 5 lakh per customer in UK is 85,000 sterling pound. Thirdly, when do you feel financial institutions go on the mode of self-regulation under the aegis of regulators? Board effectiveness is another issue. It needs to be more effective with diverse representation. And lastly, government should distance from managing the financial institutions. If you could comment on
Yes,
this.
yes. Self-regulation. I would say that not all segments of Indian financial services, the participants have the maturity to be self-regulated. You look at mutual fund industry, they have a self-regulatory body called AMFI, which is reasonably powerful. And still we had this issue of Franklin Templeton. Insofar as institution regulating themselves, actually an institution should regulate itself, and that regulation comes from its board. Uh, I would say my view, at least in the boards that I am sitting in, is I would do things not because law tells me. If law is telling me, I will definitely do it. It is like, let us say I am driving a car and I am nearing a traffic light. The light is red. If the light is red, I have to stop. I am not doing governance. I am doing compliance. Most people in India do not understand the difference between compliance and governance. Governance is one where I am driving a car, the light is green for me, I see an old person or a pregnant lady crossing the road, I stop. So even that is governance. This difference, I would say, unfortunately, the boards are at least, in my view, far away from reaching. And therefore, I don't think today the financial services sector can do with institutions regulating themselves. We are not there. The self-regulatory bodies have not done their job well. And you have external, for listed companies, you have the proxy advisories. Now, that is somewhat taking root insofar as listed companies are concerned. But I would say, if you see, deposit insurance had to come out of the fiasco at Punjab Maharashtra Property Bank failure. Uh, this has to be indexed to inflation. The limit of 5 lakhs which has come, there is no reason why the rule could not have been made that it would be reset every 3 years, adjusted for inflation. You know, the rule could have been put that way. But then there is no need for going to a department and take an approval. Everybody is waiting for an accident. We somehow seem to do well whenever there is an accident in the economy. Unfortunate, but true. I don't know whether it answers all your queries, all your remarks, Anand.
There's few more questions from Dr. Anand Kumar. He says huge intervention for financial literacy is the demand of the day, and any mis-selling needs to be dealt with severely. Moreover, right conduct of the institutions and senior managers is the important part of UK regulations. If you could comment on the same.
This is a very big problem in India, and particularly it is a problem in the lower middle class and those who are in poverty line. Since I have been part of both the customer segment organizations, I have been part of a microfinance company which is for people around the poverty line, and I have been part of an affordable housing company which looked at lower middle class and their requirements. Insurance in India is largely missold. I'm sorry to say, even today that is the position. If you are from an upper middle class, actually you will never buy an insurance product because insurance is not for investment. Insurance is for covering a risk. And this differentiation between protecting oneself from a risk and getting a return on an investment, which are two different things, much of the mis-selling in India in the financial services happens, I would say, one in the area of debt instruments, but quite largely in the area of insurance. We have a lot of space to be covered in this area. Efforts are beginning both at the instance of the participating entities and the regulators for holding awareness programs, whether through audiovisual media or through physical interfaces or through webinars like this. But we are far from there. We have not yet reached there.
Thank you, sir. Now there is a question from Dr. Sandhya Vaid. She says taking small loans is always a Herculean task, whereas big loans has different story. Take big loans and forget, approach NCLT and become sick. Bank will declare it as NPA. What is the remedy?
Uh, it was partly true, I would say sometime back, but no longer. Do you know, man, that microfinance loans, which is 25-30,000, unsecured loans are disbursed in 4 to 5 minutes? So things have changed. They need to change more. I am not saying, but they have not changed. They have changed in rural and semi-urban in India, but they have not changed in urban and metropolitan India. The other is that when you want a loan with no security or virtually not much of a security, the risk to the lender differs. The borrower must understand that the better the security, the lower the rate of interest. So you can't have a collateral-free loan at the price of a home loan. That is something you must understand.
Thank you, sir. Now there is one question from Mr. Rohit. He says one of the problem which seems to me for NPAs is illiquid collateral which cannot be sold easily to recover the loans. What is your view on the same?
This portion, illiquid collateral which can't be easily sold, I would say is only not more than 5-6% of the problem. There are three other major reasons. The first and foremost is undercapitalization of particularly MSMEs. That is a very major cause. The second is lack of orientation to handhold an entity which has got into financial difficulties, but the lending entity is not willing to do that restructuring and handhold the MSME. And the third is most MSMEs seem to think that if they have money, their problems would be solved. Actually, their marketing, their product quality is also leaves a lot to be desired. So that orientation and emphasis on quality of the product from the MSMEs in particular also is an issue. There are where the market has suddenly changed because of which an entity has got into difficulty. That is understandable. You look at, for example, somebody like Kodak. The digital cameras come and they kill that market. I can understand where there is a fundamental shift in the consumer orientation, but that also, like it happened to Nokia. Nokia failed. Nokia did not do anything wrong, but it did not do the right steps also. So there are multiple reasons why entities get into difficulty, but collateral being illiquid is not the biggest of them. In fact, I would say it is among the smallest of them.
Thank you so much, sir. Participants would agree that this has been a very fruitful session. It was such a pleasure hearing you. For a vote of thanks, I would request Dr. Anil Dangwal, sir, to share his views. Sir, please.
Thank you, Apurva ma'am. Thank you, Apurva ma'am. I, Dr. Anil Dangwal, on behalf of Team FMS and DMS, thank all the participants from various parts of our country. Then I would like to thank Sir Ravi Kumar, who has given such an insightful talk to us, because in this COVID time, all of we are very fearful about the financial futures. And he has come up as an avatar of Vishnu for all of us to guide us and show us the way and infuse some confidence into us. Sir started with a very positive note that India took almost 55 years to become 1 trillion economy, just 5 years to become 2 and 1 year to become a 3 trillion, and in next 6 to 7 years we will be 5 trillion economy. There will be 6% services, about 300 billion. Next, sir told us about the robust system and payment system we are creating, which are Aadhaar based, where we have all the credentials of the participants, and we are on the very right path for that. We are also building a robust system. Then he spoke about the regulatory authorities, RBI, SEBI, IRDA, and all Financial Services Legislative Reforms Commission, which has submitted its report and given its recommendations. Then he told us about the mutual funds, the growth of mutual funds, which is increasing, and in next 5 years, around 30% of savings will be in the form of mutual funds. Then he told us about the banks, role of banks, which are being used as the instruments of macroeconomic policies. Then about the currencies, which will be giving us some multiple growth, the insurance sector, health sector, pension funds, which will be about 20 billion. Then he discussed about some problems which we are facing, like non-performing loans, risk aversion in PSU banks, governance issues in large private banks. He clearly showed us, gave us an example of Franklin Templeton problems which it has faced, and gave us a very good example. He also told us that innovation has led to regulators being left behind in India, and the financial sector is evolving very fast. So in order to catch, we will have to reform, and we can't ignore the changes. As a large economy, the quantum of problems will grow if we are not very particular today. Then he highlighted the requirement of higher capital adequacy, which is needed by the RBI, which will be more than the rest of the world. Then very beautifully, through a parable of Akbar and Birbal, he demonstrated to us our responsibilities as taxpayers and our participation into the system, whether it is regulatory or other. Then in the last, he submitted by saying that more and more data should be put in the public domain by all the bodies, so that more research can be done and something good can be taken out from it. Thank you very much, sir. We are enlightened by your speak, and we hope to see you in future also. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, and thank you, Mr. Ravi. It was a pleasure hearing you. And just to give a last note from this, that very soon we have people from Siemens, Pepsi, and KPMG, national heads on the soft boards. So once again, I'm very much thankful to Dr. Anand, who was very instrumental to be, who acted as a gap of a bridge between the FMS, DMS, and Mr. Ravi Kumar. Thank you once again, sir, from Gurukul Kangadi University.
Thank you, all of you. Best of luck and stay safe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All the best.
Bye-bye.